like to call on stage Mrs. Gharum Possell and Bell. Please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mana Gharum. I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing at the University of Sydney in Australia. Generally, the empirical evidence in Australia shows that fuel reduction burning has been effective in reducing the severity and extent of unplanned fires. Now, the priority is for mitigation of risk to life and property, and consideration of environmental values such as carbon sequestration or provision of fresh water are limited by this priority. And you have to consider that forests in Australia that are most affected by fires, they're also most important for supply of water to millions of people, and they're very important for storage of carbon. So what we suggest in order to optimize fuel reduction burning for environmental values is a framework that considers all sorts of primary and secondary effects. And within this framework, we'll be able to define objectives and to plan the fires in terms of size and location within the landscape to achieve those objectives. Now, to understand these effects, we carry out experimental studies, or we use modeling, for example, or combination of both. What we did here is a modeling approach. So we used what we call soil vegetation atmosphere transfer model. It's called WAVES. And we use this model because it simulates water, energy, and carbon both for the overstory and for the understory. And it has a similar focus on soil as well as on vegetation. It simulates vegetation growth and death, which is particularly important for fire research. It is one-dimensional, process-based, and runs on a daily time step. And with this model, we are able to look at hydrological and ecological responses to land management and climatic variations. The model has several components, an energy balance component that partitions available energy between soil and canopy, and with that it models plant growth. It has a water balance component that simulates infiltration, runoff, evapotranspiration, and a carbon balance, which simulates carbon assimilation, carbon allocation, and canopy resistance, which is also very important for transpiration. So as you can see, carbon and water are linked. They're both modeled, and their feedback on each other are modeled at the same time. So we use this model to test a few scenarios and look at a few questions. And for example, okay, how are the processes of water and carbon affected? How long do these last? And what is the combined effect of these processes? So the first scenario is considering a forest that is not being treated with fuel reduction burning. Second scenario is that when the litter is completely removed by burning. Third one is litter and half the understory is burned. And last one is litter and 100% of the understory is removed by burning. So we ran the model for each of these scenarios for 1 year until 1 year after burning to see what happens. Now the model takes 3 sets of inputs, climatic inputs, which are rainfall, temperature, radiation, VPD, and some soil and vegetation inputs. The climate inputs, we used data from rural meteorology in Australia, which is on a 5-kilometer resolution grid-based data. And the red dots here shows a subset of sampling plots that we have. So we use 3 plots, and we extracted the information about VPD in rainfall. VPD is very important for transpiration in eucalyptus forest because the canopy is open, it's very well mixed with the atmosphere, and VPD, vapor pressure deficit, is a main driver of transpiration. We have radiation and temperature data, and all this for 1 year after burning. Now, the vegetation parameters that we need for the model are 26 parameters. I'm not going to through all of these. Some of these, after sensitivity analysis, came out more important than others. We use information from the literature or from a calibration work that a colleague has done to use those appropriate parameters for a forest type. The soil properties, we took samples of soil from the top 10 centimeters and ran a particle size analysis to be able to use a hydraulic model to get the soil hydraulic properties. And as you can see, the red dots shows that most of our soils are sandy and sandy loam. Now, in order to run the model, we need an initial state. So how much is the litter biomass, understory, and overstory biomass? The effect of topography here is minimized because the slope and aspect of the sites are very similar. We collected litter samples using that ring, and we weighed them. We measured the size of the trees, and we used allometric relationships to get biomass for the stands. And we measured the carbon content in the litter to be able to convert biomass values to carbon. Now, this is what the model spits out, basically, that happens after burning. So the first one is interception. What happens to interception is that, obviously, in an unburned forest, we have much more interception. And that's about 8 to 13% of the incoming rainfall that is intercepted by the overstory, and about 15 to 20% by the understory. Now, this is highly variable depending on the amount of leaf area index that the forest has. So we need to consider that. Now, the impact on soil evaporation is that in an unburned forest, it's about only 5%. Now, once we have removed the understory in the litter, this increases to about 15%. So it becomes an important component of the water balance, soil evaporation. And that is because there is more latent energy available at the soil surface for evaporating the water. Now, the combined effect on evapotranspiration is that once we have removed the litter and the understory, the evapotranspiration increased by 30%. And the one interesting thing was that removing the understory layer actually enhanced the overstory growth. So over 1 year, you can see the red line is how leaf area index of the overstory is growing. And because there is more moisture available, there is more radiation available, it actually enhanced the overstory growth. Now, the effect on evapotranspiration also depends on the system, whether it is an energy-limited system or a water-limited system. So in Australia, we don't have any energy limitations. The excess moisture that now is available at the topsoil can be taken up, whereas in some other system, this excess moisture at topsoil could contribute to the deeper soil layer. So you need to consider what is the limitation in the system. Now, in terms of carbon, this is how the litter is recovering after 1 year. So the blue line is the unburnt, and the other lines are the other scenarios. In some sites, for example, in the first plot on the left, after 1 year, litter carbon is returning to pre-fire condition, almost. Whereas this recovery is very different between the sites. And this can be attributed to two factors. First of all, what is the initial state of the plot? And also the other factor is the climate variation. So the balance between litter fall and decomposition. So if a site is more moist and if it is hotter, how is that affecting the decomposition compared to litter fall? Now, if we break down the above ground carbon budget into three main pools of leaf, stem, and litter, most of the carbon is stored in the stem. And what I want to show here is that even though a smaller component is stored in the litter, there is larger spatial variability between the litter pool between different sites. So that's one thing that we need to pay attention to when working at a landscape level. So in summary, application of physical models can be useful if we use models that are not, they have sort of a medium level requirements for parameters, so we can run them over space and time and assess impact of burning, for example, for a week after, a month after, or a year after. And fuel reduction burning has an impact on the canopy, on the overstory growth. We use similar soil and vegetation parameters. So the differences in carbon allocation are mainly related to the stand density and site conditions, which is rainfall temperature. And we made assumptions that there is no nutrient limitations, or assumptions about soil properties remaining unchanged with depth. So making these assumptions more accurate could give us more accurate model predictions as well. So knowledge about carbon partitioning is very important for global carbon modeling and accounting after fire. We have plenty of empirical models. We need more generic models that we can apply for larger scales. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the lady space for one question. Yes?
Thank you. My name is Katalina Stoof, Wageningen University from the Netherlands. I wondered if you have an idea about the accuracy of your model, and also whether you took soil water repellency into account, because I know that the Australian soils are notorious for their water repellency.
That's a very good question. So in terms of accuracy, where I showed you the slide about vegetation parameters and the calibration process, that's work that our colleague Willem Verboet had done. So for that purpose, we had actual measurements, sap flow measurements. So we compared those with model predictions and we calibrated. So that's to give us an idea of how accurate the model is. Now in terms of water repellency, the model doesn't have a component that would allow us to directly manage that, but this is something that can be, when you adjust the soil properties, I think you could, if you have a model to sort of include or combine, so it would be a next step to do. We didn't do it, but it's possible, I think, to do, yeah.
Thank you very much. More other question, quick one? No? Yep.
Thanks. Could you please deepen the processes that are involved in the enhanced growth of the overstory after the burning? Could you just have a more in-depth description of the processes? Because you were very fast in explaining why the overstory increased.
Yeah, so it's mostly availability of energy and water. That's how I can explain it. Because you have removed the understory, so otherwise this understory would be taking up moisture. So there's more moisture available now, and then there's also more radiation available. Yeah, latent heat. So that enhances growth for the overstory. It's how thinning works in forests. You remove some, and then you enhance the growth for the remaining. Yeah. Because the overstory leaf-area index is increasing, and leaf-area index and ET are directly linked. Yeah, more leaf-area index, more ET.
Okay, it's time out. Thank you very much for your talk.